A Field Guide to Lies, Critical Thinking with Statistics and the Scientific Method by Daniel J. Levitin is a clear-eyed, empowering manual for navigating misinformation in the modern world. In a culture where data is everywhere and expertise is often questioned or misrepresented, Levitin aims to equip readers with the mental tools needed to think critically, analyze claims, and make better decisions. Written with both intellectual rigor and accessibility, the book blends cognitive science, logic, and statistical literacy into a roadmap for separating truth from distortion in news, advertising, science, and everyday conversation. Levitin begins by highlighting the cognitive traps that make us susceptible to false or misleading information. Human brains are wired for shortcuts, which served us well in the ancestral environment but often fail us in the digital age. These cognitive biases, such as confirmation bias, availability heuristic, and anchoring, lead us to trust anecdotes over data, misjudge probabilities, and believe things that simply aren't true. He argues that learning to spot these mental habits is the first step toward intellectual independence. One of the book's major strengths is its clarity in explaining statistical concepts in a non-technical way. Levitin walks readers through the basics of averages, probabilities, and distributions, showing how these tools are often misused or misunderstood. He explains, for example, how the mean can be distorted by outliers and why the median often gives a more accurate picture of central tendency. These distinctions, though small, make a huge difference when interpreting headlines or policy claims. The book pays close attention to the visual presentation of data, exploring how graphs, charts, and infographics can be both clarifying and deceiving. Levitin unpacks common graphical distortions, like truncated axes, inappropriate scales, and 3D chart effects that exaggerate minor differences. He encourages readers to slow down and examine what a chart is really showing, who made it, and whether the design might be nudging the viewer toward a misleading conclusion. Levitin also tackles the abuse of big numbers and percentages in public discourse. He notes how statistics are often thrown around with little context, leading people to misjudge the scale or relevance of an issue. For example, a claim like, hospitalizations are up 300%, sounds dramatic, but if the baseline was extremely low, the increase may not be significant. Understanding base rates, relative versus absolute risk, and orders of magnitude are essential to interpreting such figures responsibly. The book delves deeply into causation and correlation, one of the most abused relationships in public rhetoric. Levitin patiently explains that just because two things move together doesn't mean one causes the other. Ice cream sales and shark attacks both rise in the summer, but one does not cause the other. The book explores how spurious correlations, coincidental patterns, and omitted variables are used to mislead, either unintentionally or with strategic intent. A major portion of the book is devoted to evaluating scientific claims and understanding how the scientific method works. Levitin explains peer review, sample sizes, control groups, and statistical significance in a way that demystifies science without oversimplifying it. He warns against cherry-picked data, publication bias, and the false sense of certainty that often accompanies scientific reporting. Real science, he emphasizes, is a process of gradual refinement, not a fixed set of facts. Levitin is especially critical of how the media and public figures distort or oversimplify scientific findings. Journalists may reduce complex studies into clickbait headlines, while politicians or companies may selectively cite research to push agendas. He illustrates how readers can be manipulated not by lies, but by selective truths, fragments of information presented out of context. The solution, he argues, lies in developing the patience and skepticism to look beyond the surface. In discussing fake news and misinformation, Levitin points to the structural issues in today's information ecosystem. Speed is prioritized over accuracy, emotional reaction over analytical thought. In this environment, misinformation spreads rapidly, while retractions and corrections rarely gain attention. Levitin doesn't just blame individuals. He highlights the systemic forces, economic, technological, and social, that reward distortion. Critical thinking, then, becomes both a personal skill and a civic responsibility. The book explores real-world examples from politics, health, and business to illustrate the principles at play. Levitin dissects viral stories, flawed studies, and controversial policies to show how faulty reasoning and poor data analysis can have real consequences. These stories not only entertain but train the reader to become a more discerning consumer of information. Each example serves as a miniature case study in spotting red flags and asking better questions. Importantly, Levitin emphasizes that critical thinking isn't about cynicism or constantly doubting everything. Rather, it's about being careful, curious, and willing to revise your beliefs in the face of better evidence. He advocates for intellectual humility, the willingness to say, "I don't know," or "let me check that," as a sign of strength, not weakness. The goal is not to defeat others in debate, but to arrive at clearer understanding. Throughout the book, Levitin returns to the idea that our brains are powerful but imperfect tools. He urges readers to complement intuition with reasoning, emotion with evidence, and personal belief with empirical support. He draws from neuroscience and psychology to show how habits of attention, repetition, and narrative shape what we believe. To counter misinformation, we need not just logic, but also mindfulness of how our own perceptions are shaped. He closes the book with a call to action for education and media literacy. In an age where everyone is a publisher and algorithms shape what we see, the ability to evaluate information is more important than ever. Levitin calls for schools to teach critical thinking as a core subject and for the public to demand higher standards from media and institutions. While technology evolves rapidly, our cognitive hardware does not, so it's up to us to develop habits of thought that suit our current environment. Levitin's prose is engaging, conversational, and peppered with examples that make abstract ideas stick. He has a knack for breaking down complex logic without talking down to the reader. His tone is not alarmist but constructive, framing misinformation as a solvable problem rather than a hopeless one. By making the tools of skepticism accessible, he empowers readers to become more independent thinkers and better citizens. In the end, A Field Guide to Lies is more than a handbook for spotting errors. It's a guide to reclaiming our cognitive freedom in a noisy, deceptive world. With clarity and compassion, Levitin encourages readers to slow down, ask questions, and think for themselves. In doing so, we not only guard ourselves against manipulation, we also foster a healthier, more truthful public discourse.